Okay, so welcome back to part 2 of participant observation. And in this section here, we're going to start off by talking about what role for you as an individual researcher. And some of there's a number of different questions to consider here and sub-questions to consider. And the answer really is it just depends. How well are you actually integrated into that cultural setting? And a lot of this has to do with rapport, which we will be talking about in a little bit. But it also depends on a number of factors that are controllable to an extent. And some of these things might be out of your control as an individual coming into a different cultural context. So things like your skills and abilities as well as predispositions. Of course, there can be training that you can go through to develop your skills and abilities, to consider your predispositions, your potential ethnocentrism for your ultimate success in a particular cultural setting. There are also things that you can't necessarily overcome in a sense of getting ready for the field. And a lot of this will be very much dependent on who's in the field and who you're working with. So how will things like your gender, your age, your class, your ethnicity, how that might tie into ideas about race at the local cultural setting, and how might even nationality come into play, and how will you as an ethnographer deal with this and work to bridge between this. And it might be that in some contexts that even with the best of intent that you as a male or as a female might not be able to access other females or males. Or you might not, as a male, you might not be able to research females. As a female, you might not be able to research males. It might not be culturally appropriate to do so. The other thing to keep in mind here would be legal and ethical issues in terms of what it is that you'll actually be studying. So in some instances, you have to, particularly where funding is involved, you have to make sure that you are operating in the legal realm. Ethically, you might have people that are willing to help you out and do other things for you, but you might realize that this might go beyond a mere idea that individuals are willingly participating. So you have to be aware of potential coercion that might exist. And as other ethical and legal issues as well. Also, this depends on the length of time in a field, and some research projects might be months or years. Often dissertation fieldwork or fieldwork as a whole, in the traditional sense of the word, would be a year or more in a given setting. And typically that's what we see in the context of dissertation work, and months at a time, potentially for master's work. So these are the longer type of academic works that would be produced. Now, in other instances where you have applied projects where there's a specific research question, where there's a specific time frame, you're not necessarily going to have enough time to build the same type of or to be integrated within the society as well. But I think one of the things that pointed out by DeWalt and DeWalt is the idea that you are integrated enough, that you have rapport enough to do the field work that is needed for a specific question. So in entering the field, of course, we've dealt a lot in the context of this semester with thinking about our interactions with the Institutional Review Board. And depending on the institutional setting, there will be different people that will constitute that board, looking at different issues and different concerns. And some of this will be disciplinary from anthropology, from other fields, and looking at that. And some of it might be very applicable to what it is that we're doing. And some of it might also offer new insights to get us to think a little bit more reflexively about our own discipline as anthropologists. We might also consider that if you're doing work internationally, and one of the things that of course comes up on the IRB requirements is if you have national approval, and then also local permission and the order at which those things occur. In some instances, of course, you would need both national and local permission or clearances in order for the Institutional Review Board to approve your research. And of course, these are all appropriate to have in an ethical context as well. In terms of informed consent, as we've talked about before, the key thing is that you identify yourself as a researcher with a specific research question to the community, and that individuals are aware that you are in fact collecting data. And in that sense, you, even in the context of informal conversations, you yourself become a research instrument, a data collection instrument, wherein you are, through your memory, recording what it is that you're seeing in terms of participant observation, what you're hearing in terms of informal conversations, and then being able to write out your field notes with some detail. And the key thing here, of course, is memory fades, and so it's important to write this information down as quickly as possible so you can remember the details, much like when we were doing the different recording exercises, the different interviewing exercises, the difference between recording someone and just taking notes, and what a difference that made in terms of the detail that one was able to attain from just watching an interview straight through versus spending the time and going through and transcribing it in terms of picking up the nuances and whatnot. And again, this is a skill that can be developed over time. Also, in terms of the informed consent, would be the risks and benefits, either those immediate risks or potential long-term risks and benefits for individuals. Those benefits could include even monetary compensation, either for the community or communities within which you're working, or for particular individuals that you're working with. And there's lots of different questions and debates about whether individuals should be compensated and in what cultural context and what that ramifications would mean in terms of compensation overall. We also have to keep in mind that when we first enter the field, the individuals that we might encounter might turn out to be really good key informants. They might turn out to be really good gatekeepers that can open gates for us, can show us people to interview, can bring us to particular locations, can provide appropriate introductions. At the same time, we have to be aware that not every individual that is going to potentially be approaching every anthropologist or every ethnographer that's going out into the field is going to be there with the same type of concerns, ethical obligations, or even be an integrated member of the community. So they might be opportunists, they might be deviants, they might exercise some type of coercion or power over others, they might be in a particular faction or group within that culture that might not be representative of the culture as a whole, or might not be representative of the population specifically that you're looking at studying. So these issues of power and these dynamics here. And so this idea of reflexivity comes in again in the context of ethnographic fieldwork. We have to consider not only our own actions in terms of what the ethical ramifications are there, but then anyone who potentially attaches themselves to the research project or seeks to help out, right, to be a gatekeeper for the project. So we have to consider what those potential ramifications might be as well. So this is definitely something to watch out for as you're going into the field. And you can think about this as sort of a long-term process, and indeed some of this might also be trial and error, but as soon as it becomes apparent that the individual might pose some sort of risk or ethical quandary, the best thing to do is to be frank with that person. And I think that's a key part of building this idea of rapport. And of course, we're talking about building rapport. It's much like consent. This is something that is continuously evolving, and short periods of field work, a month, a few weeks, something like that, maybe a month and a half, these are time where you can build this limited rapport to do the things that you need to produce a report. In the context of longer field work, these might be friendships that will endure over long periods of time. The Oxford Dictionary notes that rapport is a relation marked by harmony, conformity, accord, or affinity. from DeWalt and DeWalt, adopted here when a researcher and the people that they are working with have established trust and are working towards the same goal of developing a greater understanding of social phenomena. And of course, a large part of this depends on consent, depends on being really explicit with why it is that you're there and what it is that you hope to accomplish in a way that's meaningful for the people that you're working with. Some have noted that this is similar in whether we're working in an online setting or an offline setting. The idea of reciprocity is a key thing here too. The idea that we have an open and frank exchange of ideas and information, as well as materials. This might be goods that are needed in terms of things like medical supplies, sanitary equipment, these sorts of things, just everyday type of things that you might take for granted in the United States or Europe that wouldn't be necessarily readily available in the context of fieldwork that you're going to. Photographs are a nice way to share experiences, and they're also good for not only taking pictures of individuals that you're working with, but also to show individuals where it is that you come from. So there's this idea of exchange here, and the importance of this idea of returning to the community. So in the context of your field work, if something draws you away and you have to come back, you have to go back to the States or EU or somewhere else and then come back to the field location, the idea that you're returning, that's a really big deal. Overall, or even after your initial research is done, returning for a site visit old friends, these types of things. Key, of course, in building rapport would be adopting the languages, the styles of communication in terms of things like turn-taking, proxemics, body language, these types of things, and acting appropriately overall within the community. So again, this has to do with enculturation, this has to do with trial and error, and it's acting appropriately enough. The idea that individuals are fallible, will make mistakes. Some key considerations here would be things like dietary choices as well as privacy, and indeed you have to, as DeWalt and DeWalt suggest at least, that you have to be aware of your own ethnocentric predispositions and again how far you're willing to go. As they note, a good rule is to eat everything that you're presented with, as this might risk offending people, and it's generally not worth it. It might take a while to repair the damage that's done in terms of rapport overall. So in the context of the lecture, I hope to have provided you with an idea of what participant observation is, a little bit about the history of the method from a theoretical perspective and the development of the method from Frank Cushing through Malinowski sort of formalizing it, Mead's work, and then a little bit with the emic and etic perspectives. Some of the skills that you need in order to be a participant observer, and again, that's a hyphen, you can think about it as a hyphenate, as two sets of skills, one as a participant and one as an observer. And then what role for you as a researcher will depend on things that might be in your control and things that might not be in your control. Certainly rapport is something that you can build over time after you enter the field, and it's a continuous process, much like consent. Here is the main text that much of this lecture came from, DeWalt and DeWalt's participant observation. I encourage you to purchase this text and read through it. Again, this is a brief summary of some of the points that they make in the text in great detail. Thank you very much.